Gross domestic product, or GDP for short, measures the relative health of economies. That's often taken as an indicator of the well-being of a society as well. But that's come under scrutiny lately, as some question what it can really tell anyone about how the citizens in that economy are doing. Carol Graham is the Leo Pasvolsky Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and the author of The Pursuit of Happiness, an Economy of Well-Being. And she joins us now on the line from Washington, D.C. Carol, good of you to join us. How are you tonight?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Not at all. Great to have you here. How would you characterize the usefulness of GDP today, remembering that this is, of course, a concept that was developed in 1934? So as these things go, not that long ago.
Right. Well, so there's always a risk of tossing the baby out with the bathwater. And there's a lot of criticism of GDP, and some of it's justified. I think it's important to remember that Simon Kuznets, who was very involved in actually the design of GDP, said from day one that it was an imperfect measure and it couldn't measure everything. So I think you have to think of it as a baseline. It measures economic production. It's developed in a way that we can compare products and production and adjust for purchasing power parity across countries. So it's a useful measure. It obviously has limitations, and they're increasingly, I think, under the magnifying glass because of a lot of what's going on in the world economy today, and also because of this new interest in well-being. So the limitations are that it mismeasures progress in many directions. For example, it puts into its balance sheet as a positive the production of guns and oil that gets spilled into the ocean, and obviously neither of those are good things, but that it's just simply measures production. And then it omits a lot of things that have high value to people, to people's well-being, to their lives, to their quality of life, such as health. I mean, it measures health expenditures, but it doesn't measure quality of health. It doesn't value leisure time. It doesn't value time with your family. It doesn't count volunteering as anything. So there are a whole range. Childcare, for example, is mismeasured in GDP, something that's incredibly critical to the economy functioning if you're going to have a population in the labor force. So I would argue that we shouldn't throw out GDP, but I think the measures we are developing in terms of measuring well-being are important complements to GDP. And really the most important information is what we find in the gaps, when GDP tells us one thing and well-being measures tell us another. And that is very valuable information.
Yeah, and one of the difficulties, and of course one of the reasons we're talking about this, is that politicians and economists seem to focus on it laser-like as the be-all and end-all of whether or not they're doing their jobs properly. And as you've indicated, there's so much more to it than that. For example, you're working on I guess you call it an economics of happiness. What does that entail that is not captured in the notion of the GDP? Right.
So as I measured, there's a lot about human welfare and human well-being, and even economic productivity that is not in GDP. So let me just take a step back. This developed out of a collaboration between economists and psychologists, where economists, like myself, finally started using surveys of how people report their well-being in the way that psychologists have for a long time. The difference, though, is that we have large N data. We have data that covers the whole world, over many, many years. So we have millions and millions of observations across individuals, across time, across countries around the world. And now with this survey data, we have measures of their reported happiness, life satisfaction, of their reported stress or anger, of their reported optimism for the future. And what we do, it's really the most important thing, so that I don't get too into detail about measurement, but the most important thing to remember is we are not running around asking people, does commuting time make you unhappy? Or does smoking make you happy? Or does unemployment make you unhappy? We actually take the data on people's reported well-being in all these kinds of questions that I mentioned, and then we have additional data on their age, their gender, their employment status. Are they sick or healthy? Do they smoke or not? Are they, I mentioned employment, a whole range of other things. And then controlling for the things that we know are very consistent across people everywhere in the determinants of happiness, and that's age and income matters, health matters more than income, having stable relationships, having employment is very important, Having meaning and purpose in life is also important. There are a range of things that we know that really hold across all people. We can then analyze the things that vary. Do they smoke or not? Do they exercise or not? Do they live in a country with high levels of inequality or low levels of inequality? Do they live in good or bad environmental quality? And we can precisely measure the effects of those things on their well-being.
Well, let me jump in there for a second, because I do want to, I got to pursue that a little bit. When somebody gets a 10% raise, for example, in their salary, that is a very easy thing to measure in terms of how much better you were next year versus last year. But how do you actually measure how do you measure how much happier somebody is as a result of something happening in their life, which doesn't have such an obviously empirically provable scale to it?
Well, we actually do have a pretty empirically provable scale. So we measure, let's start with life satisfaction, the most standard measure. We measure that on a 0 to 10 scale, an 11-point scale. And we ask a simple question, generally speaking, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole? And then we look at the determinants of scores on that question across, as I mentioned, millions of individuals. And we know their age, we know their income, we know their health, we know whether they're employed or not, we know whether they're married or not. And then we can look both at how the relative weights of those things in determining their score, but we can also look at life changes. So we can see how much somebody drops. Say you have a divorce and somebody drops from a 7.5 to a 6.2 on the scale. That's a very large downward movement.
But again, I'm jumping in here. How does somebody who's not a scientist, who's just sort of giving you off-the-cuff feelings about this, know that they've gone from a 7.5 to a 6.2? I mean, that's not real empirical provable proof, is it?
Well, they're not thinking on the scale, but I think if you went and interviewed a lot of people in the year after a divorce, they would probably be less happy than they were, 5 years ago. So what you're looking at is the changes across a lot of people, and what's the average, drop in well-being that would come from going from being married to going from being divorced. We also look at, for example, the effects of going from being employed to being unemployed, and that's an even larger drop than divorce. We look at the effect of getting married, and this people may not like this, but actually, when you're just looking at one point in time and marriage comes out very positive in these equations, it's an artifact of construction, because happier people are more likely to marry each other. And what we find is that the overtime effect, positive effect or boost to well-being of getting married, is really only about 18 months. And then people return to their previous happiness levels. Because people have sort of I don't want to call it a set point because that's too strong, but people do have sort of an average level of well-being, and that can vary depending on these events.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were, let's say, the Minister of Finance, or in your country, the Secretary of the Treasury, and you wanted to craft a budget that focused less on improving the GDP of the country, but more on improving the well-being, however you define that, of your citizens, how different would it look?
Right, and this is, New Zealand does this. The UK has well-being metrics in its Treasury Department. So what these things are based on is looking at the values that come from these well-being equations. What are the patterns across large numbers of people, across places and time, and how much, for example, does environmental quality matter versus just income? It turns out it matters quite a lot. How much does health matter versus income, which I mentioned tends to matter more to well-being than income. We find that things like time with friends matters a lot. We find that volunteering matters a lot, participation in the arts. So what we're able to do is put a relative weight on how much people value these non-income dimensions of their lives, and then include that kind of information in budget decisions. So you don't want governments telling people how to be happy, in my view. Mm-hmm. You don't want all policy decisions based on this data, but it's important input when you're doing cost-benefit analysis. Okay, do I build another highway through this neighborhood, or do I build a park? Well, the infrastructure people might say, we have, this will improve productivity by X, but then the well-being people would say, but the park would improve well-being by Y. And then the policymaker at least has full information to make that choice and taking into account people's well-being. And then just a last point on that, because it isn't, even though we are measuring the non-income dimensions of welfare, they actually matter to people's productivity. So we find in several different studies, for example, that happier people are more productive in the labor market. They do better. They don't just earn more money, but they're more productive. We find that optimists live longer. There's a well-being boost to health. So that these things aren't, it sounds fuzzy, but they aren't just fuzzy. They actually matter to how people perform in life, in the labor market, in the health arena, in the social arena, and that there isn't a trade-off between societies having higher levels of well-being and higher levels of productivity. In fact, it's the reverse.
Well, we do recall, it's 20 plus years ago now, that the country of Bhutan used a different measurement to indicate how well their country was doing. They called it the Gross National Happiness Index. And I think I remember 60 Minutes doing a story on how Bhutan was the happiest place on earth. How successful has that been in terms of policymaking?
Well, first of all, it's by far not the happiest place on earth. It's still a very poor country with a lot of poverty and all kinds of other development challenges. It scores about where you think it would, national average GDP and national average reported happiness tend to track closely, not exactly together, but you do find that wealthier countries are on average much happier than very poor countries. Bhutan is still a very poor country, and it doesn't score particularly high. That said, the government has been incredibly forward-looking, and what they did, what they call gross national happiness, isn't really gross national happiness, but it is an enlightened development strategy where they took the same kind of life satisfaction equation, which measured what are the things that people in their country, what matters most to those people's well-being, and they prioritized the things that mattered most, and those were psychological well-being, getting out of poverty, literacy, their environment, their religion. It's a very Buddhist country, their culture, their sort of cultural heritage, and they prioritized those sort of buckets in their development strategy as they plan how to invest going forward. And a lot of the things the World Bank might be doing it too, if you think about it. Of course, they want to, increase literacy and improve health and get people out of poverty. So some of it is pretty intuitive. Some of it, they've added in important things like valuing psychological well-being, valuing the environment, preserving their culture. And those, for a different country, those priorities might be a little different. That's what's nice about this approach. You can sort of see what matters to a particular society or particular city. The city of Santa Monica in California has a well-being index, and they survey the everybody in the municipality every year, and they base certain kinds of budget and other decisions on priorities that seem to matter to people's well-being. They haven't tossed out, income accounts. They haven't tossed out all kinds of other cost-benefit analysis, but that information informs and I think comes out into better policymaking and decision-making.
Well, Carol, I'd like to think the well-being of our viewers and listeners has gone up as a result of our having had this conversation. I sure hope so anyway. That's Carol Graham from the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., and we thank you for joining us on TVO tonight.
Thanks very much for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.